Joining us now here on set for his first interview since tonight's verdict was announced is the prosecution's primary witness from this case, Michael Cohen. He's joined here tonight by his attorney, Danya Perry. We're grateful to you both for being here.
It's good to see you all.
How are you?
I guess the word is relieved. This has been 6 years in the making. Remember, the very first time that I met with the district attorney's office, we talked about it when I was on your show after putting out Disloyal. The very first time I ever met with the district attorney's office was while I was an inmate in Otisville. They came up to see me on 3 separate occasions. So this is a 6-year process within which for accountability to finally be had.
Were you surprised by the verdict?
No, I was not. I've been on so many of the shows on here on MSNBC, and I've told you all along that the facts speak for themselves. The documents speak for themselves. I've listened to so many pundits come on the various shows, including some of the hosts talking about X, Y, and Z. They couldn't be further from the truth. And I would have conversation with my lawyer, Danya, on a regular basis. And I would say, I don't understand it. I just don't understand. How come they don't see the same things that we're seeing? I understand that, it makes great headlines and so on, but the facts are the facts. And at the end of the day, the facts are what prevailed here.
You mentioned the time frame and what it's been for you. Before tonight, there was this criminal scheme that had been described by prosecutors, right? This illegal conspiracy to influence the election, payments to benefit the campaign, laundered through the Trump organization, booked falsely as funds for something else. It's been described by multiple prosecutors. But before tonight, there was exactly one person who had gotten in trouble for this scheme.
Only one.
Only one. It was you. You were not the beneficiary of the scheme, but you were the only person who had been in trouble for it. I mean, the National Enquirer got immunity, but you ended up in prison.
As did Alan Weisselberg.
Yeah. Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, told SDNY to stop the investigation after you were in prison, after you had gotten the sharp end of that stick, and to get Trump's name out of it. It's finally been 8 years down the road from these alleged crimes. I just have to ask you, I know you just said about how you feel about the verdict, but that's justice delayed. Is justice delayed, justice denied?
Clearly not in this case. 34 counts, one after the other, after the other, after the other of guilty. It's accountability. It's exactly what America needs right now. We need for accountability to be had by all those that break the law, because as we like to continuously state, no one is above the law. And today's verdict demonstrates that.
How do you think Donald Trump is feeling today in the wake of these verdicts?
Well, I can only go back to when Judge Pauley sentenced me to 36 months. You don't feel good. Sentencing is terrible. I, of course, took the plea, the 48 hours that was given to me, or they were filing the 80-page indictment that was going to include my wife. It never feels good. I did what I had to do to protect my family. This is very different. Donald didn't let it go in order to protect his family. He took it all the way. And Judge Juan Merchan, who is an absolute gentleman, to see him on that stand is to see poetry. It's to see a masterful judge who was quick with decision making. He was absolutely judicial perfection. And the jury had tremendous respect for him, as did I, which is what kept me off of all my social media. That and Danya, of course, telling me to stay off of social media. It was really out of respect for Judge Merchan in the process that I did exactly that. And the jury respects Judge Merchan, and I believe a lot of the antics that went on in the courtroom, whether it was by Blanche or by Donald himself with the eye closing, the leaning back, the total disregard for the jury, I don't think he engendered any positive feelings by anyone.
Did you feel like him? I mean, some people said he was sleeping. Some people said he was resting his eyes. I don't know. There was a lot of different interpretations about what he was doing. Your interpretation of it in the room was that he was being disrespectful to the jury?
Yes, but I was also not concentrating too much on him as I was trying to keep track of Todd Blanche's meandering questioning. That was very different. It would go from 2016 to 2018, 2019, 2020, and trying to keep track of the dates and the events when you have that type of a meandering questioner is not an easy process.
Did you, and Daniel, I'll put this to you as well, in preparing for that cross-examination from Todd Blanche, did you prepare emotionally as well as factually? It seemed like from us just watching it, being in the courtroom and from our reporters and looking at the transcript, it seemed like it was a Herculean effort to just stay calm and even keel in what seemed to be designed to provoke you and to confuse you.
A lot of our prep certainly focused on the facts, making sure, there was so much prior testimony and interviews and statements. So we wanted to be up to speed on that, refreshed.
That's not an advantage when your client has spoken a lot in public.
He has. But it was important, and I emphasize this to Michael, and he handled himself remarkably well. But I wanted him to understand that his demeanor mattered and that he needed to maintain the same type of affect and composure on direct as on cross, as on redirect and on recross. And he did that. And I think I saw a connection between him and the jury. They believed him, and I think they were just with him. And so it was, yes, there was a lot of emotion involved. Painful for me as his lawyer to watch the attacks on him, the constant, 85 times he was called a liar in the summation by Todd. He's not a liar. Nobody's a liar. No one's a truth teller. He has told lies, and he admitted to it. And the jury believed him, and they returned the swift and just verdict. And so I think all the preparation was put to good use.
What Dania's describing there about the strategic necessity of you staying cool and having that same affect and everything, how hard was it?
Not hard at all. It's the media that wants to portray me as this sort of bombastic character. It's really not my nature.
We've all heard bombast from you.
But you've heard it from my Mea Culpa podcast or Political Beatdown podcast. It's a persona for it. Now, I can't go with intelligence, so I have to go with bombastic, right? It's not necessarily my effect. Yes, I get hot-tempered. Yes, you've heard that a couple of times, here and there when I was working for Mr. Trump. But that's not generally my effect. And it really wasn't hard. I will tell you, though, 51 days of solitary confinement changes anyone and everyone. When you start to learn to live in your own head, which is a dangerous place for anyone, it's very easy to then turn around and say, I just need to pull back on myself. I need to pull back on getting angry at the nonsense of a Todd Blanche. And it was not as difficult as I thought. Staying focused with his questioning, that was more difficult. The anxiety and dealing with the anxiety on this was difficult as well.
What kind of anxiety?
I'm nervous. I was nervous because so much was riding on the result of this. And I wanted to ensure that my testimony was perfect. I knew that there could be no deviation from perfection. And both Dania and I afterwards, when the whole thing was over, we sat and we spoke for a little bit about my testimony. And couldn't understand some of the criticisms. Oh, a minute and 39 seconds. How could you possibly have two conversations? Well, you can, especially when one is not a status call. It's just an update. Hey, just want to let you know everything's taken care of. We're good. That's the conversations that take place with Donald Trump, not this long-winded, including that tape that I had recorded him, which I had done, as I had told you, for David Pecker. That was only like a minute and change. So, but that was a substantive conversation. So imagine what you could do in 1:39. And I thought Josh Steinglass did a fabulous job by putting that 1:39 out there. Susan Offinger is just a phenomenal. The whole team, the whole prosecutorial team were incredible. As we would go through some of the documents, she knew off the top of her head most of the numbers, most of the exhibit numbers. A very impressive group of people.
What did you make of the decision by the defense? And we're all speculating that a lot of the defense strategy was driven by Trump himself. We are speculating about that because we don't know, but it just kind of felt like it. But they made a strategic decision to try to make the verdict a referendum on you, including saying and being admonished by the judge for saying at essentially the last word to the jury, do not send anyone to prison on the word of Michael Cohen. How was that for you? What do you make of that decision?
Again, I didn't really care, nor do I really care what Todd Blanche says about me. What I care about is my wife, my daughter, my son, my parents, my close friends. That's who I care about and what they say about me. Danya, I care about what she says about me. I don't care what Todd Blanche says. It means nothing to me. I don't care what Don, Ivanka, Eric, Don Jr., it doesn't matter to me what any of them say about me. I know who I am, and I knew what I needed to do. So in this specific case, it was and I had said it was a very foolish strategy. And he's not really known as a defense attorney. I think it's only his second defense trial. Not a good strategy, and proof positive of that is the 34-count verdict. The defense counsel we're talking about, Todd Blanche, did an interview on another cable news network this evening. I'll let you guess which one. And he said in that interview that every decision in the case, every substantive decision in the case is one that he made together with Trump. Makes sense.
Well, I was going to ask you if you see Trump's fingerprints on some of the decisions that you're describing here.
Absolutely. The term gloat, it's a Donald Trump fourth grade playground bullying type of
you have a name
tactic.
For Todd?
What's that?
Did you have an acronym for Todd?
I did. I was going to call him a sloat, which is the stupidest lawyer of all time. You cannot listen. You cannot listen to your client when you are trying to create a defense that is as important as this one is. The very first president of the United States, former president, to ever be charged with a crime, let alone convicted now on 34 counts. It was definitively the stupidest lawyer of all time. Worse than some of the other ones that he has, in his orbit. It just made no sense at all. And any good lawyer, if he would have tried to get a hold of Danya, she never would have listened to his desire for retribution or his desire to control how the case would proceed. That's not how you run a good defense. I would never have allowed it if I was still with him.
Let me ask you about an element of the defense that was mounted, which I think I found puzzling just as an observer, and it was about the Access Hollywood tape. The defense argued that there was no new urgency from Trump to kill the Stormy Daniels story after the Access Hollywood tape, because the Access Hollywood tape was no big deal, that it didn't have a big impact on the campaign, that it didn't change anybody's mindset about the relative potential damage that could be done by another sex scandal, particularly a sex scandal like this. And the reason that was, I think, puzzling to a lot of us watching it is because we were alive then, and it seemed like the Access Hollywood tape was a very big deal then, and it would have rationally had an impact in terms of the way they were thinking about the potential damage of one of these stories. You were very close to Donald Trump at the time. You were involved in the response to the Access Hollywood tape. How does that comport with your lived experience?
Completely contrary to the reality. I was in London at the time visiting my daughter, who was studying at Queen Mary University for the semester. It was her 21st birthday, not to mention several days thereafter was my anniversary. So we were there celebrating as a family when this thing happened. I spent most of the vacation outside of the restaurants on the telephone with people like Hope Hicks and others trying to do damage control. And that was demonstrated, again, by the evidence, whether it was text messages or, corroborating testimony. That's what I had continuously said when I was on, like, Nicole's show or Joy's show or any of the MSNBC shows. This is a case that is going to come down to the documentary evidence and the testimony of others. And what ultimately was demonstrated was the fact that all of the testimony by the other witnesses that I had involvement with corroborated what I've been saying for 6 years. And all of the evidence, the documentary evidence, emails, text messages, documents themselves, again, corroborated what I've been saying for 6 years.
This case was, I think, not derided, but downplayed by a lot of people when it became clear that it was one of 4 criminal indictments in 4 different jurisdictions for Trump. This was seen as, I think, the lightweight case.
Yeah.
There's also been, a lot of discussion even in the media. Do we call this the hush money case? Is this an election interference case? How should we shorthand this? Do you think that this case was substantively important, especially, compared with the classified documents case and the January 6th case and the other ones that are out there pending that may never come to trial? Is this one substantively important on its own?
So the answer is yes, it is. But I myself, on various different shows, have said, why are we looking at these cases like this is the Kentucky Derby, that we're handicapping the 4 cases?
Yeah.
If, in fact, this was a handicap, it would be the 4th most obscene case that Donald is being charged with. Obviously, this case does not hold equal weight to the theft of nuclear secrets, the Mar-a-Lago document case, or the insurrection, the January 6th insurrection. It just doesn't. Or even the attempt to overturn a free and fair election. Nevertheless, this is an important case. It is a legitimate case. And while I would have liked Alvin Bragg to have brought it a year earlier, because that would have been good for me, right? I would have been a year earlier finished with this. It's an important case. It's a relevant case. It is an illegal act that any one of us would have already been prosecuted for. And again, since no one is above the law, Donald needed to be held accountable, just like any of us, just like I was held accountable. The only difference, I took responsibility.
In terms of, I will say, my colleagues here, I'm being very uncool and not letting you guys in here. I've got another question I'm going to ask you, but then I will let you talk to Michael as well. A lot of the reason that I think this is being greeted the way that it is across the country, 3-inch headlines in every newspaper in the country. It's not necessarily because everybody is totally engaged with the substance of the falsifying the business record to occlude the commission of another crime, which is the actual details of this is not what's driving it. What's driving it is A, that he's the first president ever convicted of a crime, and B, what's he going to do? People are very worried about what Trump may demand or expect his supporters to do in response to this, the sort of extra legal pressure and potential violence that he brings to bear on every situation where he feels victimized now is very much front of mind in terms of us and the future of our democracy. I'd like to hear what you think about that, how you calibrate that, and how you have dealt with what I know has been the anxiety around the threat level for you and your family.
So I know that he's already asked a series of the Republicans that showed up to court with him to pass a law whereby he cannot be held legally accountable for any crime. I've never heard of anything like this. He has his own set of constitutional rights that none of us are afforded the same. This is going to be a whole new law class for all these poor law students right now. They're going to have to take another course. Maybe Don, you end up teaching it at Harvard or something. Will he look to create violence? Sure. Will it happen? I don't think so. I don't believe that the American people are as invested in him as he believes. We've already seen what happened with the Oath Keepers, with the Stewart Rhodes, 18 years. Nobody wants to spend 18. I spent 13 months at Otisville, a satellite camp, but 51 days in solitary confinement. I assure you, nobody wants that for themselves. So no one's going to go out there, and do something stupid, especially, let's say, here in New York. We have the greatest law enforcement in New York. Our men and women in blue, the best. But they're also great in all the other cities and all the other states in our country. Then we have the National Guard, we have the military. No one is going to allow him to create the havoc that he wants everybody to believe that he has the ability to create.
I pled guilty in federal court to felonies for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in coordination with individual number one. And for the record, individual number one is President Donald J. Trump. I have lied, but I am not a liar. And I have done bad things, but I am not a bad man. I have fixed things, but I am no longer your fixer, Mr. Trump. And I am going to prison and have shattered the safety and security that I tried so hard to provide for my family.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. Until yesterday, the only person having to pay the legal consequences for interfering in the 2016 election with the illegal cover-up of hush money payments made to porn star Stormy Daniels was that man, Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen. Cohen went to prison for what you just heard him describe, crimes that benefited and were directed by Individual One, Donald Trump. It's no longer the case. Now, Individual One has been convicted by a jury of his peers. Yesterday's dramatic and consequential verdict in the election interference hush money case came down swiftly and decisively. Donald Trump was found guilty on all 34 felony counts. Michael Cohen's former boss is now the first ex-president to be convicted of a crime for which he will be sentenced on July 11th. Michael Cohen was the one who paid the hush money to help Donald Trump in the final days of the 2016 campaign. Michael Cohen was the one who was later repaid in installments, 12 of them, with some checks signed by Donald Trump himself from the Oval Office. Michael Cohen was the one who tied Trump directly to those payments. He was also the one who has been attacked repeatedly and ceaselessly by Donald Trump and Trump's legal team. The ending of Trump attorney Todd Blanche's closing argument went like this, quote, "You cannot send someone to prison. You cannot convict somebody based upon the words of Michael Cohen." But that's not what this case was at all. It wasn't just Michael Cohen's word or testimony. He was the prosecution's star witness, but the state built a meticulous case with documents and multiple witnesses and multiple pieces of evidence. Michael Cohen spoke about that last night when he joined all of us soon after the verdict was announced.
What ultimately was demonstrated was the fact that all of the testimony by the other witnesses that I had involvement with corroborated what I'd been saying for 6 years. And all of the evidence, the documentary evidence, emails, text messages, documents themselves, again, corroborated what I've been saying for 6 years.
6 years. Just stop for a second. Close your eyes and remember what you were doing 6 years ago. 6 years. Today marks 9 years to the day that Donald Trump descended those golden escalators, to announce his run for the presidency. Well, he stood there again this morning in Trump Tower as a man now convicted of felony charges. This morning, he railed against the justice system that has finally held him accountable. While he acknowledged he's still under a gag order, Trump did go after Michael Cohen.
By the way, this was a highly qualified lawyer. Now, I'm not allowed to use his name because of the gag order. But, you know, he's a sleazebag. Everybody knows that. Took me a while to find out. But he was effective. He did work. But he wasn't a fixer. He was a lawyer. You know, they like to use the word fixer. He wasn't a fixer. He was a lawyer. At the time...
You say tomato, I say tomato. The conviction of Donald J. Trump on 34 felony counts is where we begin this hour with his former lawyer, and fixer Michael Cohen. He's the host of the Mea Culpa and Political Beatdown podcast. He's the author of the books Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the U.S. Department of Justice Against His Critics, and Disloyal, a memoir. How you doing?
Hanging in there. I had the pleasure of watching the press conference today, was wondering whether or not that gag order was still actually in place. Because, once again, Donald just violated. He doesn't care about the law. He doesn't care about anything other than venting, like a petulant child.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is nothing that he said was true. You know, Mary Trump said it best yesterday. He's now unhinged. And to listen to the rambling, meandering, just like Todd Blanche during his cross-examination, that rambling, meandering, sort of thought, that's all that he did. I think he embarrassed himself, not just in front of the folks that were working at the Trump Organization that were there filling the spaces.
That's who those folks are, right?
Yeah. But he's also embarrassing himself in front of anyone that was watching. He accomplished nothing with that. Zero.
What do you want now? Do you want closure? Do you want to move on? Do you want to never see or hear his name again? What do you want?
Now, unfortunately, what I want, I don't think I'll ever attain. I want peace. You can't have peace when Donald Trump is around, because one of the things he talks about in many of his books, it's a common theme. If you hit him, and it's in his mind that he's being hit, he needs to strike back at you 10 times harder. He needs to hurt you 10 times harder. And so long as the two of us exist on this planet at the same time, he will constantly seek to hurt me. And I will never be a punching bag to Donald Trump or anyone.
What do you think he's feeling right now?
Well, I think he's incredibly unnerved. He's not 100% sure what's actually going on, and that's the part that's really scaring him the most. Nobody's telling him the truth. So, Donald, if you're watching, here's the truth. The truth is you're in trouble. The second truth is that you will be found guilty. Now, whether or not you end up doing any time behind bars, you've heard me say this before, which is I would prefer you not to be, and not because you don't deserve it, but rather because you possess secrets, you possess national security information that puts the rest of us at risk. And I don't trust you with that information behind bars, believing that you would sell that information for a bag of tuna or for a book of stamps. And that's my biggest concern. So a home confinement scenario would be just fine, the way I see it. And I believe that Judge Merchan, who I've said to several people today, I find him very Solomonian. He's really very even-keeled. He's incredibly judicious and respectful of the process, something Donald is not. I believe that he will make the right decision, and the right decision will be not just for Donald, but really for respect to the office of the presidency.
That he once held, or that he seeks
that he once held.
What is going to happen to Donald Trump now?
Yeah, look, I'm not a prognosticator, though I've been pretty good at it so far, to pat myself on the shoulder, if I may. I think Donald loses, and I think he loses by a landslide. While a lot of people may right now openly claim that they're supporting Trump, I think when you're standing in the voting booth and you say to yourself, can I really vote for a guy who is a convicted felon, who is already been charged with assault, in fact, rape? Can you go with somebody who is absolutely unhinged and says the wild and crazy and stupid things that this man says? Can you really put America in that position with whether it's adversaries or allies, with foreign dignitaries, where he will disrespect anyone? He will do anything so long as it benefits him. He will sell, as I believe that he has already done, shown top secret documents to adversaries or to folks who have no right to see those documents. We know that the Australian billionaire at Mar-a-Lago, the fact that the guy's a billionaire doesn't give him rights that you and I do not have. He did not have the right to see those documents. But Donald started waving them around like they were a comic book or, some just random piece of paper. They are not. They are secrets that put American service persons in harm's way. One was about a nuclear sub and how many nuclear warheads are on that specific vessel. Are you crazy? I mean, who tells anybody that? It makes no sense. How about the fact that during Helsinki, he had no representative with him, and he was talking to Vladimir Putin, a KGB agent who was so much smarter than him, with Putin's translator. And he's just randomly talking. And the problem with Donald Trump when he talks, he says things. And that's the danger.
We're back with Michael Cohen. Michael, I want to ask you about the defense's case, if we call it that. When they put Costello on the stand, it seemed insane because it felt like the part of your direct testimony that implicated Trump the most was the part about Costello. And then they put him up, which allowed the state to go back on cross and ask him, like the last thing the jury heard was about how Trump's sort of mobbed up cutout was trying to pull you into the fold through Rudy. What did you, just as a lawyer, what did you think of that?
So my road with Costello has been one that is fraught with all sorts of crazy controversy and back and forth attacks on one another. Bob Costello is a dirtbag. Say nothing less than that. The fact is, what I realized early on is that he was playing me through Rudy. And I realized early on that what he was looking to do is to use me in order to gain or garner more connection with Rudy, his friend, and Rudy with Donald. And anything that I would say to him would immediately go back to Donald. And therefore, if the fear is that I would cooperate, they would know in advance. It was sending a mole into your house. And I realized it early on. So I always kept him at a distance, but I kept him close enough in order to see what was going on, because I didn't want to be out of the fold. I wanted to know what was going on for my own self. Then I realized he was pushing for himself, for Donald, at my expense. And I was like, this has to stop. Why they put him on is because Donald is a myopic thinker. And again, when you have somebody like Donald running his own strategy of defense, it is a flawed defense. They saw Bob Costello in Congress. And Donald liked the way that he acted, the way he attacked me, the way he made stuff up. And by the way, you want to talk about a perjury charge? The entire thing, unless he wasn't under oath, that I don't know. But Donald liked the way that he attacked me. And he's like, we got to get this guy on. I could just see Donald saying, we got to get him on.
Fox celebrated them. Laura Ingraham said the same.
Exactly. Right. Laura Toomer, the whole this guy, Trustee, and then you had the guy, the lawyer from GW University's law school, Turdley. This is the issue. So Donald's like, oh my God, this guy is the one who could help us to smash Cohen to Smithy. You see, the flawed defense is the destroy Michael Cohen defense.
Right.
That's the mistake that they were making. He believed that by destroying me, that would exonerate him from his crimes. And the answer is that's a flawed defense. You don't win your case by trying to damage a non-party subpoenaed witness. You do it based upon your own evidence, right, of your innocence.
Right.
Well, that wasn't what that's not what Donald's about. He doesn't have it. So the nice thing is the 19 other witnesses that came up, they pre-corroborated everything that I've been saying for 6 years.
I want to ask you what happens to Donald Trump now. We learned today that ahead of sentencing, he'll have to meet with some sort of official of the court. He'll have to go through things.
Yeah, it's a probation. They're going to do what's called a pre-sentencing report. He's going to meet with someone. They're going to ask him 1,000,001 questions. The part that he's going to have personally a problem with, and that's, again, if they treat him the way they treat everyone, myself included. I went through it not once but twice with the unconstitutional remand. But what they do is they sit you down and they take a full history on you. They force you to urinate in a cup, which you're doing in front of your probation officer. It's in a room that's all mirrored. I'm sure he's going to be very unhappy with that.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, there's a lot of things that, you know, you have to share, including all of your finances. You know, he's going to have to put, I mean, his is significantly more complicated than the average. It's not the only one of its kind. There have been many people with significant money that have gone through the system, and they'll obviously put somebody on who's capable of understanding. But all of his freedoms now become limited. If he wants to travel, he's going to have to get a travel authorization request form. And he's going to have to fill it out just like everybody else and wait for the approval process. Now, I'm sure they're going to grant it, just as mine was continuously granted. And there's no reason that they shouldn't, but he has to surrender his passport, which I believe he's already done that. His firearms, his firearm license, he loses that. You know, there's a lot of your liberties. Now, the question becomes whether or not he's going to be treated again like in the banking world. Is he going to lose, as I did, your banking relationships?
Right.
I don't know. You know, he's friendly with Jamie Dimon of Chase. Will Jamie Dimon go to bat for him and risk the reputation of Chase or any of the others? Like, allegedly, he's got millions at like a Morgan Stanley account or something. Will he lose it like every other person?
Right.
Or are they going to give him some sort of special, you know, dispensation?
Right. What do you think he does with this experience in terms of the rage and vitriol he directs toward his perceived political enemies?
Now, he's already made that crystal clear. He wants to be what he claims is the country's retribution. He wants to be their, you know, their force. He's not talking about for anybody else other than himself. And one of the things that he said, like, for example, he wants to go after the president of MSNBC. He wants to use SEAL Team 6. You see, again, it sounds so hyperbolic. It sounds so like Handmaid's Tale. It's like dystopian.
His supporters don't believe him,
Right.
but I think we've seen him over 8 years.
If you're not going to believe what he's saying, how could you believe anything anybody else is going to say? These aren't Michael Cohen's words. These aren't Nicole Wallace's words. These are Donald Trump's words telling you. On day number one, he wants to rewrite the Constitution. He wants to confer all power to himself. He wants to use SEAL Team 6 to go after his enemies. He wants to throw everybody in Guantanamo Bay. Go throw them in Gitmo, you know, and with the hands, with the accordion hands, right? Throw them all in Gitmo. No, you can't throw American citizens in Gitmo. It's not permitted. But it is under a Donald Trump regime.
How does he look to you? Does he look the same as he did in 2016?
No, he looks deflated. Now, I don't know if that's the Ozempic or if that's just the stress that's getting to him. But whatever it is, he does not look healthy. He looks as he should right now. He's concerned. The anxiety has got to be getting to him. I remember when, right after I pled and I had 60 days within which to report to Otisville, and I remember as you get closer to that 60-day, the anxiety really builds up because you realize, hey, this is coming. And he knows July 11th, he knows he's in trouble. He knows that you don't get 34 guilty counts against you and then you end up getting a slap on the wrist and you're only allowed one Mar-a-Lago burger, not two, and no ice cream for a month. That's not how it works.
Yeah. When you were in solitary, Did you,
Which time?
the first time, the 51 days?
No, it's first it was 35, then it was another
second was-
16.
Welcome back, everyone, to a special 3-hour edition of The Weekend. Yes, we've already been on for an hour already if you're just joining us. 12 New Yorkers have affirmed the principle that no one in America, not even a former president, is above the law. In a historic ruling, a jury unanimously found Donald Trump guilty on 30 counts of falsifying business records. Now, the criminal case hinged on the testimony and the evidence of the trial's narrator, Trump's fixer turned foe, Michael Cohen. And Michael Cohen joins us here now. He's the author of Disloyal, the true story of the former personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump, and Revenge, how Donald Trump weaponized the U.S. Department of Justice against his critics. He's also the host of the Mea Culpa and Political Beatdown podcasts. Thank you, Michael Cohen, for joining us.
I seem so busy, don't I? I'm actually really not.
Just a busy guy. So I wanted to set a little context here because when this all began for you, in many respects, at that time, Trump is in the White House. You had got caught up in this thing, were on your way to prison. How now, having this come full circle and watching what occurred this week, do you appreciate that role, that narration? Because I thought that was very interesting and important for you to frame this chapter in this context because you knew how everybody else was going to come at it. But for you, it was like, it's time to tell my story and to tell this the way it occurred, the things that happened, what I saw, what I heard, and what I did for Donald Trump.
So I've been trying to tell the same story for 6 years. I couldn't get the story out against the Trump mega microphone machine with all of the crazy GOP members of Congress and the sycophants. So I wrote a New York Times best-selling book. It still didn't work. I wrote a second New York Times best-selling book. It still didn't work. Now at least I had the platform at a trial, the first in U.S. history of a former president to be held accountable for the things that I've been talking about for 6 years. Remember, the DA's case didn't start when I was released from Otisville. It started while I was in Otisville. 3 times the Manhattan DA's team came to visit me there.
So that's where it began for you.
That's where it really all began. That's where this saga began.
Mm-hmm.
You know, prior to the start of the trial, you were very careful, I think, not to discuss anything that the Manhattan DA's office had discussed with you. You wanted to protect the integrity of the trial. Now that the verdict has come down and that piece of the trial is over, we move on to sentencing. I'm wondering what the initial conversation you had with the Manhattan DA's office when you found out that they were actually going to bring this case forward. What was that conversation?
Remember, there were 2 separate DAs that were involved in this case. First, it was Cy Vance. So again, when I was in Otisville, it was Cy Vance's team. And then I had met with Mark Pomerantz when I was ultimately released from Otisville as a result of COVID. Then that case sort of went away. And we all remember that whole story with Mark Pomerantz. And then Alvin Bragg became the district attorney, and he took up the mantle. But he was looking at a different set of charges than what Cy Vance was looking at. And a lot of people, myself included, were very disappointed because they believed that there was more than enough in the other set of charges to come against Trump and hold him accountable for those crimes. Well, I guess we were all wrong, and I'm the first one to be able to admit that I was wrong. Alvin Bragg certainly brought the right case. 12 jurors unanimously decided on 34 counts guilt.
Todd Blanche was on the Today Show on Friday talking about the prospects of an appeal. Take a listen, and then we'll talk about it.
You're confident on appeal.
Yes.
What's your number one issue? Don't give me a legal brief that you haven't written yet.
I think the recusal issue is meaningful. I think the statute of limitations, the way that the background of why this case was brought is meaningful. I think that the witnesses, I do not think Michael Cohen should ever be somebody who can be relied upon to convict somebody.
You're part of the case. Now you get to be part of the appeal.
Oh, thank you very much, Todd. You know, I have a name for Todd.
I do know.
Blanche. It's called Sloat, stupidest lawyer of all time. Let me be very clear, Todd. All right, because I'm sure he's watching like everybody else. I mean, great ratings, by the way.
Right?
Thank you.
He's the stupidest lawyer of all time. Why? Because you don't make the defense of a case like this. Let's discredit one of the witnesses. Let's discredit the narrator of the story. There are 19 other people that were called by the Manhattan District Attorney, the prosecutors, by Susan Offinger, by Josh Steinglass, obviously Alvin Bragg leading the charge. 19 people testified, which all corroborated, again, the narrative of my story. What I had been saying, again, for 6 years, corroborated by 19 independent people, some of whom, by the way, worked for Trump and still remain loyal to him.
Is it your instinct, though, that they had trouble formulating an alternative defense, or is it your instinct that Donald Trump was calling the shots and said, just go after Cohen?
Combination of both.
Yeah, I think so.
Guaranteed, it's all predicated around Donald Trump calling the shots. I've seen him do it going back to 2007 when I started working for him. He calls the shots. It's the wrong thing to do. You don't allow your client to dictate to you the terms of your defense, especially when you're talking about something as important as this case. What you do is you turn around and you let them create the defense. You could participate in it as a client, but you don't dictate the terms of the defense. It is, again, stupid, which is why I call him the Sloat.
They want to make this about you, but I mean, there's a paper trail. There are documents here that corroborated and that held up everything that you said. And it wasn't just you. There was David Pecker, and there was Hope Hicks.
And Keith Davidson. And there was Jeff McConney, and there was Deborah Tarasov.
I mean, Alan Weisselberg wrote the crime down on a piece of paper. What is your sense of... Why didn't they come for David Pecker in the way that they came for you and the way that they came for Stormy Daniels? And why were they not more critical of Hope Hicks?
Yeah, well, Hope Hicks is sort of the poster child for, she's young, she's attractive, she's intelligent, and she's very soft-spoken. So she is like, we'll call it a prosecutor's dream poster child, despite the fact she was involved in so many aspects of what was going on there. Me, New Yorker, brazen, brash, easy to attack me. Why the Southern District of New York did what they did, why they gave David Pecker and Alan Weisselberg immunity in order to testify against me, to this day, nobody can give me that answer. It doesn't make any sense.
How then do you should we be processing? Alicia raised the part about the appeals and the next level up of this and the level of involvement you're going to have there. You have these other narratives, though, Michael, that are out there around you, around others, in terms of Donald Trump is the victim here. But the one thing your narrative makes very clear, and I think is going to be important on the appeal, is Donald Trump was the architect of a lot of this. He's a micromanager of micromanagers. So he's not one of these guys, one of these CEOs who sits back and then every quarter gets a debriefing on what happened in the last 3 months. He's involved day in and day out. Do you think that narrative reinforces the argument as it gets in front of an appeals court? In other words, this is less about Michael Cohen, despite what Trump's lawyers are saying, and it really is, as the 12 jurors decided, all about Trump.
Yeah. So remember that, and Donald has put this in many of his books. If you come at him, he's going to come at you 10 times harder. Mm-hmm. I seem to be the only one who has stood up. Truth, and I shouldn't say the only one. Stormy Daniels certainly has.
Right,
E. Jean Carroll has. I'm talking about in this specific narrative. I'm certainly front and center onto it. And so his feeling is not only do I need to knock Michael down, but I need to also set an example for others that you don't want to be Michael Cohen. You don't want to be taking the blows that I and the members of Congress that are supporting me are going to be coming at you.
So what's the difference?
This is a mafia message.
But what's the difference between you and Weisselberg? Weisselberg is like, don't know nothing, not saying nothing.
Well, Weisselberg is still in the camp. He's still in the cult, and he will not testify against Donald Trump. He has the right under law not to testify. Could take the fifth, and that's what he did. And as a direct result, he's now spending some more time at Rikers Island.
He's in Rikers. Like
Second time.
I'm struck by that. And I mean, y'all ain't been to Rikers, but I'm struck by the fact that when you went to prison, you went to jail for, as I've heard Nicole Wallace say many times, you did not have the sexual encounter with the young lady. It wasn't even you. But you were at this point, the one person that was held accountable for everything that went on. And that was a inflection point for you. Why do you not think that's been an inflection point for someone like Alan Weisselberg?
There's no way to explain why he refuses to provide the testimony that we all know that he has. I mean, as you stated earlier, it's in his handwriting. It has his initials next to it. It's got one of the checks, actually two of the checks, have his name written on the bottom of it. So why he refuses to do it? Nobody. He's under an agreement. He gets a severance of like $2 million if he doesn't testify. I mean, talk about obstruction of justice. Look,
and that was something that wasn't able to come up in court, by the way.
Right.
That was something that they were not
permitted to do that. Right. Talk about the severance. So we'll
court.
just talk about it here on the weekend. Another thing that we should talk about that nobody else seems to be talking about is yesterday's wackadoodle press conference.
Oh, we're going to get to that. You know what, Michael, can we take a break? And then we're going to talk about that press conference on the other side of the break.
If you insist, it is your show.
Well, we appreciate that. We're going to continue the conversation. Yes, I need a sip. So right after, you're watching The Weekend, folks. Stay with us. Cohen, before we went to break, you were talking about the press conference, and let's just be clear, it was not a press conference. It was a statement that was with the press as the audience, because at the press conference you take questions, that Donald Trump did on Friday.
Yeah, filled with a whole bunch of people that work in the building and so on. But as I was watching it, I just decided I had to put out something onto my Twitter account. I wrote, Trump's press conference was nothing shy of a bat-S crazy avalanche of broken brain word manure. Because that's really what it was. It was a rambling series of nonsense. But here's something that's interesting that no one's talking about. We're going to break it right here on the weekend. He's not even allowed to do that press conference in Trump Tower.
Why not?
Because he doesn't own the public space. If you look outside the door, it says open to the public. He gave away that space years ago, 40 plus years ago, in order to build the residential portion. That's how he obtained the FAR, the air rights, in order to go as high as he did for that property. He does not own it. Therefore, you need a permit. He was warned of this in 2016 during the campaign. But does Donald Trump care about the law? No. Yeah. The same way he put out the clock on Fifth Avenue without permits. I mean, he just does things. The law doesn't apply to him the way it applies to the rest of us.
I think that's an important point, and it's a part of the psychology of Trump that I've always been fascinated by. And in my encounters with him earlier on in 13 or whatever, and then just watching him subsequently, it is very clear he's a man who believes I will do it unless you stop me. And he doesn't believe you can stop him. And there is some truth to that, Michael. I mean, you look at how our systems, our judicial system, our political systems, our media have just capitulated to his brand, his level of pugnacious, offensive behavior, treating it as entertainment, treating it as politically prescient in terms of how Republicans look at it. What is it about him that allows him to your point, do the thing he's not allowed by law or by principle to do, and yet everything around him just kind of goes, okay.
Except, I will note, we're having this conversation in the context of the fact that he has been convicted of 34 felony counts.
I got that. But we are,
and $500 million in the New York Attorney General case, and another $100 million.
But folks, we are 8 years. We're 8 years into this, so we're at now we're at that point. But look at all the terrain that has been disrupted and burned to the ground before we got to that point. And that's what I'm talking. This accountability now is important, but along the way it wasn't there. So my question is, what was it about him that made people feel? I mean, the lawyers that didn't get paid, the people, and yet they come back. The banks who had defaults, and yet they would give him a loan the next time. What is it?
Yeah, it's unexplainable. I mean, I truly don't understand it either. Now, is Donald Trump entertaining? Absolutely. I mean, first of all, the Oompa Loompa-ish sort of look that goes on. I mean, how many people have made fun of the orange tan or the cotton candy hair and so on for years? He actually embraces the attacks. He believes anything negative said about him is a positive. I mean, that's a narcissistic sociopath by design. What he does is he makes everything about him. And for whatever the reason, people just go along. He brings out the worst in people
and they seem to like it.
They not only do they like it, they embrace it and they run with it.
And I want to know, not like it. He about to go to jail, maybe. Okay,
well, let's talk about that, because two questions for you. One, which is, having gone through this pre-sentencing hearing, I want to hear from you sort of what that experience is like and how you think he's going to do it. I've also heard you say you don't think he should go to prison. I want to understand more about why.
Okay, so the first part, yes, I did go through that process, the pre-sentencing report, so thanks for bringing up a bad memory. Sure. It's a horrible process. You sit down with an individual and you basically have to open up your entire life to them, whether it's financial, whether it's medical. They need to know everything. And it is based upon that document that gets submitted to the judge for review, and the judge uses that in determining the sentence. Now, here we see, once again, to Mike's point, Donald is bombastic. They want to call me the bombastic one. They thought I was going to come onto the stand with a baseball bat or a 9-iron and start swinging it. Donald Trump is the only one every single day who went out there and attacked everybody, right? And again, he had a whole slew of members of Congress sitting behind him doing the same thing. That's going to determine the sentence, including the violations of the gag order, which I believe he did again yesterday. I still think the gag order is in place, and his behavior, his 10-minute rambling about me, he's violating the gag order. Do I think that he's going to be convicted? Absolutely. 100%. Do I think that Judge Merchan is going to sentence him to prison or to jail? The answer is no.
Right, but you think you've also said that you don't think he should be sentenced to jail? And
I'm afraid of him going to jail.
Why?
And not for him, not for his safety. That's on him. He's got Secret Service protection. I'm more concerned for you and for all of us and our families than for the American people, because this clown had 4 years of being debriefed on national security issues. On top of that, if he becomes the Republican nominee, he gets debriefed again starting now. Think about this. America, think about this for a second. You have now a Republican leading candidate who is a felon who's going to be debriefed on national security issues, knowing how loose-lipped he is, how he's willing to give away America's secrets to Vladimir Putin or to anybody for money, or just simply for bragging rights. He did it with the Australian billionaire at Mar-a-Lago. He sat there in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin talking about national security issues, but nobody else was around except for Vladimir Putin's translator. I mean, these are not normal things. You don't allow somebody like Donald Trump to be declassified, especially now as a felon. So my concern is, in a prison situation, he's willing to give away these secrets, as I always say, for a bag of tuna or a book of stamps. And he will do it because he doesn't care. If America turns against him, he'd rather see America burned to the ground. And that's who Donald Trump is, plain and simple.
That part I believe. That I believe. Although I think his behind needs to go to jail. But
well, you know what, Michael Cohen, will you stay for a little longer?
For you, absolutely.
We appreciate you. Michael Cohen is going to be here, and we will be right back. You're watching The Weekend. Back with Michael Cohen. Before we went to break, you were talking about the press conference. And let's just be clear, it was not a press conference. It was a statement that was with the press as the audience, because at a press conference you take questions, that Donald Trump did on Friday.
Yeah, filled with a whole bunch of people that work in the building and so on. But as I was watching it, I just decided I had to put out something onto my Twitter account. I wrote, Trump's press conference was nothing shy of a bat-S crazy avalanche of broken brain word manure. Because that's really what it was. It was a rambling series of nonsense. But here's something that's interesting that no one's talking about. We're going to break it right here on The Weekend. He's not even allowed to do that press conference in Trump Tower.
Why not?
Because he doesn't own the public space. If you look outside the door, it says open to the public. He gave away that space years ago, 40 plus years ago, in order to build the residential portion. That's how he obtained the FAR, the air rights, in order to go as high as he did for that property. He does not own it. Therefore, you need a permit. He was warned of this in 2016 during the campaign. But does Donald Trump care about the law? No. Yeah. The same way he put out the clock on Fifth Avenue without permits. I mean, he just does things. The law doesn't apply to him the way it applies to the rest of us.
I think that's an important point, and it's a part of the psychology of Trump that I've always been fascinated by. And in my encounters with him earlier on in 13 or whatever, and then just watching him subsequently, it is very clear he's a man who believes I will do it unless you stop me. And he doesn't believe you can stop him. And there is some truth to that, Michael. I mean, you look at how our systems, our judicial system, our political systems, our media have just capitulated to his brand, his level of pugnacious, offensive behavior, treating it as entertainment, treating it as politically prescient in terms of how Republicans look at it. What is it about him that allows him to your point, do the thing he's not allowed by law or by principle to do, and yet everything around him just kind of goes, okay.
Except, I will note, we're having this conversation in the context of the fact that he has been convicted of 34 felony counts.
I got that. But we are,
and $500 million in the New York Attorney General case, and another $100 million.
But folks,
just
we
about
are
to EG.
We're 8 years into this, so we're at now we're at that point. But look at all the terrain that has been disrupted and burned to the ground before we got to that point. And that's what I'm talking. This accountability now is important, but along the way it wasn't there. So my question is, what was it about him that made people feel, I mean, the lawyers that didn't get paid, the people, and yet they come back, the banks who, had defaults, and yet they would give him a loan the next time. What is it?
Yeah, it's unexplainable. I mean, I truly don't understand it either. Now, is Donald Trump entertaining? Absolutely. I mean, first of all, the Oompa Loompa-ish sort of look that goes on. I mean, how many people have made fun of the orange tan or the cotton candy hair and so on for years? He actually embraces the attacks. He believes anything negative said about him is a positive. I mean, that's a narcissistic sociopath by design. What he does is he makes everything about him. And for whatever the reason, people just go along. He brings out the worst in people
and they seem to like it.
They not only do they like it, they embrace it and they run with it.
And I want to know, not like it. He about to go to jail, maybe. Okay,
well, let's talk about that, because two questions for you. One, which is, having gone through this pre-sentencing hearing, I want to hear from you sort of what that experience is like and how you think he's going to do it. I've also heard you say you don't think he should go to prison. And I want to understand more about why.
Okay, so the first part, yes, I did go through that process, the pre-sentencing report, so thanks for bringing up a bad memory. It's a horrible process. You sit down with an individual and you basically have to open up your entire life to them, whether it's financial, whether it's medical. They need to know everything. And it is based upon that document that gets submitted to the judge for review, and the judge uses that in determining the sentence. Now, here we see, once again, to Mike's point, Donald is bombastic. They want to call me the bombastic one. They thought I was going to come onto the stand with a baseball bat or a 9-iron and start swinging it. Donald Trump is the only one every single day who went out there and attacked everybody, right? And again, he had a whole slew of members of Congress sitting behind him doing the same thing. That's going to determine the sentence, including the violations of the gag order, which I believe he did again yesterday. I still think the gag order is in place, and his behavior, his 10-minute rambling about me, he's violating the gag order. Do I think that he's going to be convicted? Absolutely. 100%. Do I think that Judge Merchan is going to sentence him to prison or to jail? The answer is no.
Right, but you think you've also said that you don't think he should be sentenced to jail, and
I'm afraid of him going to jail.
Why?
And not for him, not for his safety. That's on him. He's got Secret Service protection. I'm more concerned for you and for all of us and our families and for the American people, because this clown had 4 years of being debriefed on national security issues. On top of that, if he becomes the Republican nominee, he gets debriefed again starting now. Think about this. America, think about this for a second. You have now a Republican leading candidate who is a felon who's going to be debriefed on national security issues, knowing how loose-lipped he is, how he's willing to give away America's secrets to Vladimir Putin or to anybody for money or just simply for bragging rights. He did it with the Australian billionaire at Mar-a-Lago. He sat there in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin talking about national security issues, but nobody else was around except for Vladimir Putin's translator. I mean, these are not normal things. You don't allow somebody like Donald Trump to be declassified, especially now as a felon. So my concern is, in a prison situation, he's willing to give away these secrets, as I always say, for a bag of tuna or a book of stamps. And he will do it because he doesn't care. If America turns against him, he'd rather see America burned to the ground. And that's who Donald Trump is, plain and simple.
That part I believe. That I believe. Although I think his behind needs to go to jail. But
well, you know what, Michael Cohen, will you stay for a little longer?
For you, absolutely.
We appreciate you. Michael Cohen is going to be here, and we will be right back. You're watching The Weekend. We're back with Michael Cohen. Thank you for sticking around, Mr. Chairman.
Not like I had a choice.
We did ask for permission.
Kind of locked him into the chair. A couple of things I want to touch on, but one of them I want to finish up on the prison portion here. There is this. See, here's where I come from. I get the whole former president thing. All right, okay. And I'm looking at all the former presidents before Trump, and none of them did any of this. None of them wound up in the court system, have been adjudicated, raping someone and all this other stuff. So by virtue of all of that, for me, all the entrapments of the presidency, being a former president, kind of go away. I mean, as a former lieutenant governor, if I go out and I start criming like Trump has crimed, right? I'm not going to be able to rely on the fact that I was once an elected official. We have countless elected officials that have come before Donald Trump, from the U.S. Senate, governors, et cetera, who do not have the benefit of their former office to protect them. And everyone kind of bend over backwards for them in the judicial process because of their former position. That's how I look at this. You forfeit that, Mr. Trump, when you behave the way you behave while you were in office and while you were trying to obtain that office. So for me, this idea of being the president, being treated that way when it comes to what is the penalty for your crime, the 34 counts is, okay, what would it be for anybody else? You get up to 4 years. All right, so it's 18 months plus community service. But there, for me, should not be a bar just because. I mean, you seem to think differently, and I understand the rationale.
In fact, I agree with you 100% on that. What I am
worried about
is I'm willing to put aside that for the fear of the danger that he will place, not he might, he will place America in, if in fact that he is put into an institution, a jail or a prison. He will do it. There's no doubt in my mind. The same way that he did it while he was in office. The same when he was in Mar-a-Lago, and there's the recording of him trying to impress people by showing them secrets. We know for a fact that he gave away information on how many nuclear warheads are on a specific nuclear ship, one of our military vessels. I mean, think about how dangerous the information in that guy's head is, and he doesn't think. And we saw that from yesterday's press conference.
I guess it's something we're going to wrestle with for the between now and July 11th until the sentencing. I will just note that, one, I don't think we can operate out of fear, because if that was the case, people wouldn't have held him accountable. I mean, you wouldn't even took the stand. And then the United States has now joined the rest of many other democracies in the Western world, Italy, France, Israel, who have held current and former presidents accountable in the legal system for criming, as the chairman would say, that they did when they were the president.
I want to end not by talking about Donald Trump, by talking about Michael Cohen. I want to take you back to 2019 and something that the late Representative Elijah Cummings said to you in a House Oversight Committee hearing. Take a listen.
I know that this has been hard. I know that you face a lot. I know that you are worried about your family. But this is a part of your destiny. And hopefully, this portion of your destiny will lead to a better Michael Cohen, a better Donald Trump, a better United States of America, and a better world.
Do you feel you're a better Michael Cohen?
I'm a different Michael Cohen than I was. I'll tell you, those words hit me the same way now as it did back then. He's a special man. I'll tell you, a lot of people don't know this, but that night, he called me after, not to talk about the hearing, just to ask me if I was okay. And I said to him, one day I will be. I don't know how long it's going to take, but one day I will be. I'm not there yet. I'm far from okay. But hopefully his words come to fruition one day.
Well, you say you want peace, and you say you'll never get peace so long as Donald Trump is here.
Yeah, I don't believe I ever will.
Michael Cohen, as always, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Next, Lachlan Cartwright and Suzanne Craig are going to join the table.
One of the lines Donald Trump and his MAGA allies love to feed their base is that President Joe Biden's Department of Justice has been weaponized against Trump. How else could you explain Trump being charged with 88 criminal counts in both state and federal courts, 34 of which he was convicted of just last week? They cannot for a moment believe that the DOJ and local prosecutors are simply following through with their mission to uphold the rule of law. But just to remind you, it was Trump's DOJ in 2018 that first prosecuted Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, Trump's co-conspirator in the hush money election interference scheme. Remember, there were 3 people at that Trump Tower meeting in August 2015 who conspired together to influence the 2016 election through unlawful means. The former publisher of the National Enquirer, David Pecker, Cohen, and Trump. Pecker's company signed a non-prosecution agreement, and he received immunity from federal prosecutors in exchange for cooperation on the investigation. Cohen went to prison. And now Trump has been convicted and is awaiting sentencing for his crimes. I'm joined now by Michael Cohen, former personal attorney to then President Donald Trump, and prior to that, principal of Crisis X and a key witness in Trump's trial. He is the host of the Mea Culpa podcast, co-host of the Political Beatdown podcast, and author of Revenge: How Donald Trump Weaponized the U.S. Department of Justice Against His Critics, and Disloyal, a memoir, the true story of the former personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump. Michael, it is good to see you. I want to start on a note that is not the most pleasant, because it does appear that the consequences for your cooperation in this election interference trial have been personal, and you have thought about it and talked about it before. You were doxxed. Your family was doxxed after the verdict. The phone numbers of yourself, your wife, your children were posted early Monday morning on a site that's been used to target other figures involved in Trump's various legal issues, according to the group Advanced Democracy, which is a nonprofit research group. We know they're trying to dox the jurors, too. Talk about that experience, and do you feel safe, and are you protected?
Well, look, I don't want to get into whether I have protection or not, obviously, to give some of these maniacs an opportunity within which to come at me. But yes, we have been receiving unwanted phone calls and emails and text messages, including last night around 11 p.m. The doorbell rang, which, of course, is somewhat unsettling. It was actually the concierge in our building saying that there's a Domino's pizza that was delivered to you. And I didn't even know that Domino's was in New York City, to be honest with you. And they had it, unfortunately, under my son's name. So this is sort of the behavior that we are contending with, simply because I testified, and they're unhappy. When I say they, I'm talking about MAGA is unhappy with the results.
Yeah. And what advice would you have for these jurors? Because I think all of us in the media are as curious as people are as to who these jurors are. It seems the best advice would be for them to remain anonymous, probably permanently.
Yes, agreed. But what they should also do is what I did. I contacted my local police department to let them know that this is happening. I filed filing a police report on that, in which case they will now have that information readily available in the event that a situation arises.
Let me let you listen instead to what Chris Christie has said, contradicting whether or not Donald Trump is afraid of going to jail.
I've known him for 22 years. When I was doing these cases in New Jersey and I would put political figures in jail, he would say to me, I could never do that. I could never go to jail. And I'm telling you, no matter what he says, no matter how he's bragging and going on about him not being afraid, he goes to bed every night thinking about the sound of that jail cell door closing behind him.
Is Chris Christie right, or is Donald Trump right that he's not worried about it?
Yeah, so I actually saw the interview on Fox that Donald claimed, it'll just be what it'll be and so on. Chris Christie is absolutely 100% right. Right now, Donald isn't thinking about it. He's a very interesting guy, Donald. If it's 4 weeks away or 5 weeks away, to him, it's eternity. But as the days start coming closer, that's when you're going to see him becoming even more unhinged, if that's even possible, as it gets closer to the day of reckoning, to the day of sentencing.
Well, we will watch and see. I'm sure everybody, unfortunately, will be watching everything that he is doing. Let me talk a little bit about a piece of reporting from ProPublica. Multiple Trump witnesses apparently received significant financial benefits from his businesses. One campaign aide had their pay doubled from $26,000 to $53,000. Another employee got $2 million in a severance package, essentially barring him from voluntarily cooperating with law enforcement. What do you make of that behavior?
This is not new. You may remember quite some time ago, Omarosa was contacted by Lara Trump, and I know that recording is out there floating around, where they were concerned that Omarosa was going to provide information which could be damaging to, at the time, President Trump. And so they offered her a position at the RNC for something like $50,000 a month. This is the game. Now, why is Donald okay with it? Because it's not coming out of his pocket. So he's not even thinking about it. I mean, the fact that you have a $2 million severance, which is to Alan Weisselberg, that Boris Epstein got a massive bonus and so on. first of all, Boris is completely inept. The fact that he is a legal strategist, this is a guy who's never tried a case in his life. It doesn't make any sense. This is to keep everybody in line, which tells me that at least Donald learned something about the ordeal that's taken place between he and I.
Yeah. Let's talk about the charge by Donald Trump and his supporters that the Department of Justice has been weaponized against him. They are alleging, completely without any facts, that somehow the local DA, Alvin Bragg, was colluding with the Department of Justice, et cetera. You shared with us some documents that we know were a matter of a news item before, which was you actually were asked to sign an agreement when you were now out of jail because of COVID, and in order to stay out of jail, they wanted you to sign an agreement. Talk a little bit about that agreement, because it was unusual. This was an engagement that no one had really seen, that barred you from talking to the media. And it said no engagement of any kind with the media, including print, TV, film, books, or any media or news, prohibition from all social media platforms, etc. Talk about that.
By the way, it also included friends and family, which I thought was incredibly unusual. So I appeared at the request of a guy named Adam Pakula, who is the lowest level employee there at the Bureau of Prisons at 500 Pearl Street, where I met with him and his supervisor, a woman by the name of Enid Phoebus. And they present me with this document, which is supposed to be what's called an FMLA, FLMA, a Federal Location Monitoring Agreement. But unlike any other FLMA, this does not have any designation to it. It is not a standard form. It's not a form that has ever been, to at least my understanding in investigation, it has never been used before. It was produced specifically for me. And paragraph number 1 is this unconstitutional prohibition of me to speak, which is a violation of my First Amendment constitutional right. So I had brought my friend Jeffrey K. Levine, who's a lawyer, with me because I was concerned at how this had transpired, until ultimately, when we said, hey, this is really violative, it's really overbroad. My book is already with a publisher being printed. I would be in violation if I signed this agreement, which, by the way, is a counterfeit document. It doesn't exist in the system. They asked us to wait in the hallway, which we did, and about an hour later was met by 3 marshals who handcuffed and shackled me, then put me into a room which was probably about 35, 40 degrees in terms of temperature, and then sent me back up to Otisville for another 15 days of solitary confinement. And this was all done pursuant to my book Revenge and the research. This was all done by Bill Barr, and we all know that the only time Bill Barr did anything is when Donald Trump told him to do it. So I then got very fortunate, and my wife was able to find an attorney who you have met many times, and she was with me at the recent trial, the criminal trial, right. Danya Perry. And Danya then filed a habeas petition within which to have me released from Otisville based upon this unconstitutional remand, which was granted by federal judge Alvin K. Hellerstein, who in his order turns around and says that this is retaliation by the president and the attorney general in order to silence a critic of the president.
In short, the weaponization of the Department of Justice, but not by Joe Biden's DOJ. Michael Cohen, thank you.
And that's the funny thing, but Joy, that's the funny thing about Donald Trump. What he's doing is he's projecting. And that's what Donald does. He's projecting what he believes that everyone is as criminally inclined as he is. So he's trying to impugn that behavior onto the Biden administration, knowing that that's what his administration, not only that they did it to me, but that they intend to do it to many other people if, God forbid, 1,000,000 times he retakes the White House.
Michael Cohen, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Thank you.